Okay guys, now let's talk a little bit about troubleshooting posts before the video is active. Now if power is getting to the system but the screen is blank, turn off and then back on, and listen carefully to any beep codes or BIOS speech messages in case your system does that prior to it loading during your post test. One beep or no beeps indicates generally all is well, but if you hear more than one beep, look up the beep code in the motherboard or BIOS documentation. BIOS will give beep codes when a post error occurs during the boot before it tests the video. And here is just a brief table to share with you about common beep codes and their meanings for both Intel and Award BIOS. So if you hear some of these, you can look them up. Now, different manufacturers will possibly have different meanings for their beep codes. So just make sure you go out to the internet and look up your manufacturer and do a search for those beeps during your post. That's pretty much it for the beep codes during the post before your video is active. So make sure you listen for those and do your research to find their meaning or their description. Hopefully you never run across this, but in case you do, now you know why those beeps are occurring during the post before the video starts. Now another situation you have is troubleshooting error messages during the boot. Now if your video and electrical systems are working, most boot problems show up as an error message on the screen, whether it be a black screen or a blue screen. Error messages that occur before Windows actually starts to load usually apply to hardware components of your computer. Now here's another table I want to share with you over error messages that occur before Windows starts. A CMOS battery window might pop up that says the CMOS battery is low. To change out your CR2032 standard battery, or if your system has a different battery. Maybe a lot of times this happens where you might see that the memory size has decreased. So this might indicate that a memory module has gone bad. So you need to shut down everything and troubleshoot your memory slots and your memory sticks. So here's just a variety of error messages you might see that are going to occur during the boot of your system. Now if Windows Boot Manager program has problems loading Windows, you might see a different set of messages that will be displayed. Now as I said, you may see error messages that occur on a black screen. It's usually put there by the startup BIOS during the post, or you might see error messages that come onto a blue screen or after the boot that are put there by Windows, and those are called the BSODs, or startup errors, or just we usually just call that the blue screen of death. And that screen unfortunately has been around for quite a while. Make sure once again that you search the web for your BIOS or motherboard manufacturer, or you can even go to the Microsoft website depending on the error to find an error message that tells you what to do about correcting that error, the meaning of that error, and then what to do to fix or resolve your situation. Now here's an example of a Windows error message that occurred early in the boot that is related to software. So if you just look through this, you'll see what file was affected and any type of information that is related to that. So you might need this information as you do your search to figure out the resolution for this. So this is just an example of a screen you might see. As I said, you may see a black screen or the unfortunate blue screen. Of course, any screen that pops up before your splash screen is not a screen that you want to see, right? Now we'll talk a little bit about troubleshooting the motherboard, the processor, and the RAM. Now there are only a few components of the motherboard that are on the motherboard that are what we consider field replaceable units, or FRUs. And these are items you can buy pretty easy to be able to change out yourself. Now they are the processor itself, the processor cooler assembly, the RAM, and the CMOS. Now, as parts of the actual motherboard, those are the parts that have been deemed field replaceable units that can be done by a general technician or consumer. Now we're not thinking about anything else that's a peripheral device that's attached, whether it's a card or hard drive, optical drive, just actual parts for the motherboard itself. Now, the motherboard itself is also considered a field replaceable unit, or FRU. Now, as you troubleshoot your motherboard and possibly discover like maybe some component is not working, such as like a network port, you might be able to just disable that component in your BIOS setup and then just install a card onto the motherboard to take the place of that non-operational part that you're experiencing the issues with. Now, here are some symptoms that a motherboard, processor, or memory is failing as these field replaceable units. Maybe your system begins to boot and then powers down. This could be an issue with one of these three parts. Error messages are displayed during the boot that refer to these. Your system becomes unstable, hangs, or freezes at odd times. Or there's intermittent Windows or hard drive errors that are occurring. It may not actually be with your operating system or your hard drive itself. It could be because of these components. So check the simple things first, as with all troubleshooting. And to find the source of the problem, just do some of those simple things, such as maybe the problem's a virus and it's affecting this. So go ahead and run your antivirus software to check for viruses, or perhaps you've got a couple pieces of software that you run for antivirus software. Run those and see if maybe a virus is the root of the evil here. Maybe a memory module is failing. Go ahead and use your memory diagnostics tool to test the memory that's installed on your computer. Let's take a look at that in case you don't remember. As you think back to chapter 12, think about what that command was. Lo and behold, there it is. In case you might have forgot, open up an elevated command prompt. This is one method of doing it. And type in md.sched.exe to do your memory diagnostics to schedule that to run. When you run that, you will preferably run it on a boot up, so it will run as you see here. Now, memory can be a tricky issue, so be careful, and as you can, make sure you have good memory laying around. If you ever test some that is bad, dispose of it right away. Make sure that you mark it as bad, so if you're going to use it as a prop later for either showing to the customer that it was bad, that was the component that was bad, or if you're showing it with coworkers or whatever as a training tool, just make sure that it's marked as such. But you don't want bad memory laying around that you will try using later on to troubleshoot and then realize you have a bad stick of memory. But as you can see, the memory diagnostic tool, it runs on its own. Not much for you to do other than wait and have a little bit of patience, but that is definitely one of those Windows tools you want to remember. Another thing you can do is to check for potential hardware problems using your device manager. So make sure to bring that up and see if you're having any issues with any of your devices. If you perhaps can, make sure to download and install any of the Windows updates or patches that are available, in case, as I've said before, a lot of people don't update their computers very often or at all, and then that can be, the root cause of that problem. Another step to find the source problem is if the problem began after a change or a new install, or even an uninstall. So make sure if it's the problem that it's with a change that's been made, uninstall that device or that application and see if that corrects the problem. So it's always best, if you are the one doing the install, that you keep the old equipment with you until you've made sure that the new equipment works as needed, especially if it's just something as simple as an upgrade. There are times that you will get a device that is dead on arrival, we call DOA, where the product that was shipped to you is a bad product and you just need to ship that back. That does occur. Another thing with RAM is to check and see how much RAM you have installed, and then go ahead and check your system window to find out how much RAM it says is installed. If you think there might not be enough RAM, that's being bogged down too much, go ahead and purchase some more RAM and add it to the computer if you can. Cost-wise, that's one of your cheaper upgrades. When you think about the motherboard and the processor, those are very expensive and time-consuming to replace. So hopefully you can figure out that it might be something as simple as RAM or just installing more RAM. If this is a computer that you have deployed and you have kept a copy or a screenshot of the BIOS setup, check your BIOS to see if something has changed there and ensure that the proper settings are set up in BIOS. Perhaps with an issue is that the BIOS needs to be updated. So go out there to your manufacturer and see if there is a BIOS update that should be installed. My general rule is if you are one who likes to keep your computer updated, don't flash your BIOS too early on when a update is available. Give it a few weeks or a month to make sure that there's not any issues that are occurring with that, because having a bad BIOS flash is not a good day. See if another thing you can use is if the computer has a disk that came with the motherboard for doing different diagnostic tests on the motherboard. Run that if you can as well. That's another of those quick tools you can grab to do some troubleshooting. Check your motherboard components and see if there are any drivers that need updating that possibly may not be working. I've had this happen before as well, where just you have a problem with the device, you go to troubleshoot it, you don't really find anything, but you see that you check your drivers on the manufacturer for that device. If there's a newer one, you update it, lo and behold, that fixed the error. That was the reason for that driver update, was because that problem has become enough of a pest that the manufacturers have updated that. Once again, make sure that you search the support sections of the manufacturer websites, as well as maybe some forums, to look for the issues if they're being reported and what a possible solution is.